Now we're going to have a theoretical look at the attitudes that we may encounter in the interview. And I suggest that we stop on the one that we must have to be successful in a semi-structured interview. The attitudes that were decrypted by Porter in 1950 in psychosociology are of 5 types. The first type is that of evaluation. Evaluation, which can be positive or negative. We can say this in different words. We can say having a sympathetic attitude or an antipathic attitude. You can understand easily that the antipathic attitude is not desirable, but it is more difficult to understand why a sympathetic attitude is not desirable. I'm going to tell you why the sympathetic attitude induces biases in the interview that you are leading with the person you're speaking to. Each time that you're going to nod your head or smile, that will show approval. A word which will show that you think the person you're speaking to is right. You will be conditioning the person you're speaking to. You will direct them, and therefore there will be a bias introduced, and unconsciously they will answer in a certain way just to make you happy, because in a relationship, within an interview, as I was saying before, we are sharing a common history. We're trying to be successful in your undertaking. You're trying to be successful in your undertaking. But the interviewee who has decided to welcome you at one moment is also trying to make this undertaking successful, to make you happy. Therefore, I would like to heavily underline this. We mustn't be sympathetic. We will see in a moment how you must be. But for the time being, we'll remember we are neither antipathic, neither sympathetic, nor sympathetic. So we're not in this first attitude, which was Porter called evaluation. Second attitude that Porter described was that of interpretation. You saw in the previous exercise that in the answers proposed with regard to the interviewee, the interviewer was making comments, was talking about what had just been said. You are not to comment what is said to you. You are not to bring your science and your knowledge, your personal life, into the interview at that point. Therefore, you are not in an interpretation or an explanation of what is said. This would be harmful to the good relationship that we are seeking to establish within our semi-structured interviews. So the third attitude, which is very common in the environment of planners in the broad sense, for agronomical engineers, foresters, who not only know things but know how to do things, it is the advice attitude. The advice or support attitude consists in proposing a solution. And why are we tempted to do this? We're tempted to do this because we want to help the person. But this is not how you will necessarily help them the best. I will come back to this later on, especially in the conclusions. The best thing that you can do at that point in a semi-structured interview is to listen properly to what the person is saying. Your interviewee has accepted to be listened to, and your job at that point is to listen. And you must trust the person. Very often the fact of advising is because we do not trust the people. It's because we feel obliged to bring something in at that point. And what you are there to bring is not there. What you are there to bring is in your listening. The fourth attitude described by Porter is inquisition. In fact, in English, they say investigation, but it's in the sense of police investigation. I will use inquisition because it's more significant. We're trying to find out, we're asking a lot of questions to find the information we're looking for. We ask questions here and there, and we go further, and we go too far. We go too far with regard to the person's privacy to begin with, and we go too far with regard to our research. This sort of curiosity, which is no longer the professional curiosity of a researcher, which is a non-reflective curiosity. Oh yes, this is it. It would be interesting to ask this question at session. No, it's an inquisition. And we can realize that it's an inquisition in the sense that it no longer holds any relationship with the variables that we set down at the outset. So remember the importance of properly establishing the variables, and at all points of the evolution of the work, of the cycle of the survey, to ask ourselves the question whether we are in line with the variables. If yes, we continue. If not, it means that the unrolling of the work must be modified, and maybe we should revisit the variables. So the final attitude, and this is the one which must be adopted in our interviews, is that of understanding. It's an attitude where technically we are listening and we let the person speak as much as they wish. And in addition, we reformulate to understand without judging. We reformulate what the person has just said in a summary fashion so that the person continues to speak, or to make sure that we have properly understood.
C'est l'acceptation inconditionnelle de l'autre.
This is the unconditional acceptance of the other. However, unconditional, I've put some inverted commas there. So to begin with, unconditional in the sense that we do not issue any judgments. We let people speak. We let there be silences. We will come back later on the silences. And we speak properly. I come back to the inverted commas around unconditional. I accept the other. I accept the other, but I think before about what I myself am able to accept. I will be working in a setting which has values that are different from mine. Are these values compatible with my own existence here and now, whilst I'm in this region or in this country? If yes, when I go and visit this person, I accept the person as they are. Of course, up to a certain point. If something unfortunate occurs during the interview, I can withdraw from the interview. If somebody insults me, I'm not going to accept to be insulted by that person. Second point is well-meaning neutrality. Meaning we have an interest with regard to the other. If one morning you are ill, not in good shape, not feeling very well, and that you don't want to go to the interview, then don't go to the interview because it won't work. You must feel well in order to properly perceive the other person, in order to feel interest for the other person. If it's a day where you need to be alone, do not go and do an interview. Have a rest, try to clean up your surveys, but don't do any interviews. There are times where you have to accept that, well, maybe today is not the right day. Third point we mentioned on different occasions is authenticity. Authenticity is expressed in different forms, in different things. We spoke of clothes. I said wear something which is suitable for the other, but also for you. Respect of the other and respect of yourself. So there is a reciprocity which installs this confidence that during the interviews. So authenticity, have interest for the other, interest which is not forced. I told you at another point, do not be obsequious. And also authenticity towards the end of the interview, when the other person will take an interest in yourself as a person. Normally, if you lead your interview properly, there is an end of the interview, and after the end of this interview, you let the other person turn their interest towards you. It's a very human thing, and you have to let them do this and not say, well, I've finished my job, off I go. It's respect, a question of respect, and this is where we can bring something. It's not through advice, but it's through respect, and this is an element of respect. And no doubt the person will be more interested by what you are yourself, maybe the number of brothers and sisters that you have if you're young, or where are your parents, or the number of children that you have, more than the company to which you belong, or the university. So you had your interviewee play a game. You must accept to play the same game for your interviewee. You respected them in their privacy, and you must make sure that your own privacy is respected. But you asked him how old he was, so you have to accept that they ask you your age. So accept to answer questions that you have asked yourself. So be ready for this. So be ready to have these questions turned back to you. And one of the good ways of knowing whether your questions are good, proper, is to ask them to yourselves. And if I ask this question to myself, could I answer? Would I want to answer? And this is where we enter into a fundamental point, which is empathy. Empathy is understanding the other from inside. It is putting yourself in the other's shoes. So the questions that we prepare for the other, you can first ask them to yourself, even if you transpose them into a different context, because we're not necessarily a civiculture, or we're not necessarily a sheep breeder. But with regard to your own profession, with regard to your family, your objectives, your strategies, to see if it works with yourself. So this is the important word, empathy, and which is positioned above sympathy and antipathy. Very often when you will be in attitudes of reflection before, during or after the interview, you will have some flashes of light where you'll say, oh no, I'm going too far in sympathy here. I have to come back to empathy. So you might not quite formulate it in that way, but it will be a little flash of light that will suddenly begin to appear regularly, and that will help you. Beyond this, there is something which is very important, which is the second point, and these are the silences. In the silences, I will distinguish empty silences and pregnant silences. It seems a bit strange. What is an empty silence and what is a pregnant silence? Empty silence is when we stop the person speaking in their thought and in their expression. In the different videos that you saw up until now, you saw, for example, people being bombarded with questions. A person that asks a question, another one asking another question, a person that asks a question and does not let the interviewee finish explaining what they have to say. There are a few cases that we have underlined where we saw that people stopped talking, and we saw this time what we call a pregnant silence. And the interviewee started off again by themselves. What happened? Their brain had continued to think about the question that you had asked, composed the answer, and delivered it up to you following a silence. We need time. We cannot answer immediately questions that we do not necessarily ask ourselves as we get up in the morning. So practice yourself in asking yourself certain questions. If people ask you how many brothers and sisters you have, if you have 2, it will come spontaneously. If you are from a polygamic family where there are many wives, then maybe you might need a little more time to think about it. If you are asked what your professional background is, you will need time to answer this question. And yet you're very familiar with your professional background. It's your life. But you have to think about it. You have to recompose. You have to say, well, I started like this, then I did this. And you think, you add, and then we stop. And hoping that the person that's asking you the question doesn't ask you another question immediately. And you could say, oh, I forgot. Between this period and that period, I did this. Or you might want to go more in-depth into something which appears to you to be important as an interviewee. So turn the situation round. Be empathetic and say to yourself that the interviewee might want to go more in-depth in something that you haven't thought of. And that is pregnant silence. And you must therefore let this pregnant silence roll out. So to summarize things with regard to these 2 points, active listening, professional listening, will be empathy plus the respect of pregnant silences.